I had a question. We find that Sari Menu had seen Yishmael Mitzachik. He was acting with, the word literally means with levity. And she says to Avraham Avinu, you must drive the maidservant with her son from the house. And Hashem says to Avraham, whatever Sarah tells you, Shema b'kolo. You should heed her voice. And Rashi explains which voice, her voice of prophecy, because she was a greater prophetess than Avraham Avinu. So the Torah tells us Avram sends Hagar with Yishmael away, chemes mayim, with a flask of water with bread, and the Torah tells us the story. But when the Torah tells us they left, it says Vatelach Vatesa Bamidbar. Those are the words. Also, Perak Chaf Aleph Pasuk Yudal. V'yashkim Avram baboker, v'yigach lechem v'chemes mayim. He took bread and a flask of water, jug of water. V'yitein al Hagar som al shichmo v'sayeled v'yishalcheyu v'tesa v'atela b'midbar Beersheva. And she went and she was wandering in the midbar of Beersheva. Okay, that's the pasuk. So Rashi says over here. Vatelach vatesa. You see Rashi. Chozo liglulei ovio. She went back to the idolatry of her father. That's vatelach vatesa. Meaning she went, and tesa means she was like wandering in the desert. She was semi-lost in the desert. So it's a famous word from Rav Mordechai Pagramansky, was the famous Baal Tshuva in Europe, which Rebelli Lapian had said that it was worth for him to come into this world to make that one Baal Tshuva. As Rebelli Lapian said about Rav Mordechai Pagramansky, spoke about him. And he was a Talmud of the Tel Yeshiva. He was tremendous genius, and he became one of the leading Torah sages before the war in Europe. And he explains, how do Chazal know that Vatel Vatasa means that she returned Liglu Avia to the idolatry of her father? It says she was wandering. She was lost in the desert. He said that anybody who's connected to Hashem, there's no such thing you ever lost. Not that it says she was lost, that means she was cut off from Hashem, because if Hashem is always with you, and Hashem is always part of your mind and your emotion, you never lost. And since the Torah refers to her, she was lost in the desert, she was wandering, that's the indication she was cut off. That's the famous word from Mordechai Pagramansky. But Chazal tell us, Chazig Lu Aviyah. Okay? We find that initially, when Hagar became pregnant, she acted with a certain level of disrespect to Sari Menu. And Sari Menu oppressed her, and she fled from the house and she went into the desert. And we find that, and she miscarried at the time. The Torah tells us an angel calls out to her from heaven, and the word malach is mentioned 4 times. That means 4 malachim, 4 different angels were sent to her to communicate certain things to her, to speak to her. And it seems to be she wasn't fazed, because you find by Manoach, initially that's the story, that's the father of Shimshon, that his wife had met someone, he told she's going to have a child, they were childless, and she has to be careful not to eat any grape derivative. And then she called the husband out to the field, and the man had said to her the same thing, had repeated it to her, and they had brought a korban, and the person jumped into the fire and went up. So he realized it was an angel. So he says to his wife, if we saw an angel, I think I'm going to die. Hagar engages with 4 malachim and she's not phased. And here, Manoach, he's concerned. He saw the angel, he's going to die. Why? So Rashi says, because Hagar was familiar with angels, because in Avram's home, angels frequented his home. So it wasn't something out of the ordinary for Hagar. So she was a special woman. Okay? Here the Torah tells us that when she was sent away with Ishmael, she went back to idolatry. So the Torah tells us that once the water was used up, was consumed, and she realized her son was dying, she distanced herself from her son. Vayishma Elokim es kol hanar. Elokim heard the voice of the lad. Vayikra malch Elokim el Hagar min hashamayim. An angel called her from heaven. Vayoma lo ma lo Hagar al tiri ki sham Elokim es kol hanar kasher usham. So here she's engaging with an angel. An angel, and it doesn't seem to be she's fazed by this. So the question was bothering me, if she already detached herself from Avram, that Chazal Gulu Avi, she went back to the idolatry of her father. So how's the angel communicating with her? And it seems to be she's at a level that she has the capacity to tolerate this communication. Before, when she was in the home of Avram Avinu, she was carrying this child. Okay, it's not a problem. Because Hagar was a special woman. And she rose and advanced to that special status of Kedusha. But here was Chazal Gula Via, and the angel communicates with her. Seems to be she's not faced by it. She's not impacted by it. That's number one, first thing that bothered me. After Avram Avinu passes away, we find that Rashi cites Chazal in this week's Parsha, after Yitzchak married Rivka, right before, he went and brought Hagar back to his father that he should marry her. And that was Keturah. Keturah was Hagar. So the question is, why was she called Keturah? Because her actions were like Torres. It was like the incense offering. She was so holy and so pure. Or she didn't engage with another man after she left Avram Avinu. That's why she was called Keturah. I mean, if she went back to Glu Aviyah, I mean, how was Yitzchak without bringing her back to his father? I mean, Avram now, although she went back to idolatry, he's taken her back. It's hard to believe. So what does mean Chazal Gula Aviyah? So I was thinking that it has to do with a certain man who's passing. That's why I'm mentioning it. But this question bothered me on Shabbos. So what I was thinking to say was, we say in the Kriyishma, Hisham lachem pen yiftel levavchem, v'sartem. The second paragraph of the Shema. Hisham lo pen yiftel levavchem. You have to be concerned. You may be seduced by your heart. V'sartem, v'avaratem alihim acherim. And you're going to serve false gods. You can go back to idolatry. Here we speak from Shema Tishma Mitzvosa. You keep the mitzvahs. You're at a special level. Everything's be great. But but you have to be careful. If you can be seduced, your heart. Is that's what happens. The moment you allow yourself to be influenced, it's you're going to idolatry. There's quite a distance from allowing yourself to be seduced to end up with idolatry. So how do we understand it? So the way it's explained is that the moment the person allows himself to be seduced, to be influenced by the Yetzer Hara, and you allow it, as they say, it's a slippery slope. Chas v'sholom, you can end up, that's how quickly it can happen. The moment you're vulnerable, you never know where you could end up. It's similar to what the Gemara says in Shabbos, a person who becomes enraged with anger, he's like an idolater. So the Gemara asks, I mean, is that what happens when a person becomes enraged, loses his temper to that degree, he's become an idolater? The Gemara says, because the moment the person becomes angry and you do certain things which you go into an irrational state, you become vulnerable to the what? To the influence of the Yetzer Hara, to the evil inclination. And in that state, he could tell you to who knows what. He could even tell you to do idolatry. He could, because in that stage, you're vulnerable to anything. Therefore, that's the Gemara. So say, you have to be careful. The moment you allow yourself to be seduced, you never know how quickly it could go. So this is what I was thinking. No, there's a word from the Chofetz Chaim, regarding the laws of Hilchos Shabbos. We have a concept known as Kli Rishon. If you have a vessel on the fire, and the heat which is contained in the walls of the vessel is due because it was connected to the fire, if you put something into that vessel, even if you remove it from the fire, but it retains that level of heat, you're able to cook in that vessel. That's called Kli Rishon. A Kli Sheni. What happens if you take water you boil with the first vessel on the fire, and you pour into a second vessel? A Kli Sheni is not mavashel. And then you put something raw in that second vessel, it doesn't cook. Even though the temperature may be a higher level of temperature in the second vessel than the first vessel, not the same vessel. Two separate situations. Let's say the first vessel was 180 degrees Fahrenheit. Now you cook something else. So once you put that in a second vessel, although it's the same temperature, well, basically, and above 113 Fahrenheit is cooking, that second vessel will not cook, although it's above 113. But if you have 113 or 115 or 120 in a Kli Rishon, it cooks. So what's the difference between Kli Rishon and Kli Sheni? Why in the Kli Rishon does it cook and Kli Sheni doesn't cook? So Tosfos explains in Shabbos that the vessel where the heat is contained in the walls of the vessel, because it was connected to the heat, that heat is a constant heat. A constant heat has the ability to cook. The moment you take that food item from the first vessel, put it in the second vessel, and say liquid, it touches the walls of the second vessel. And since the walls of the second vessel are cold, immediately the temperature starts dropping. So even though at this moment it may be above 120, maybe 150, but since the temperature is in a declining temperature does not cook. That's how Tosfos explains why the Kli Rishon cooks as long as it's above 113, and a Kli Sheni, even if it's 150, it's not going to cook because it's declining temperature. That's how Tosfos Shabbos explains it. So the Chofetz Chaim explains a person who's associated with Talmud Chacham. The Gemara tells us in Tainis that if a Talmud Chacham becomes upset and becomes angry, you have to give him the benefit of the doubt. Why? Because the pasuk says, "Kol dvari keish num Hashem." The words of Torah are like fire. So the Talmud Chacham is the fire. The one who studies from the Talmud Chacham. What is that person? The one who has the relationship with the Talmud Chacham. He says he's the Kli Rishon. He's the vessel that's attached to the fire. Talmud Chacham is the fire. What happens if you have a Kli Rishon? You have a vessel on the fire, and then you remove it, and now that vessel drops below 113. Even though that vessel originally was on the fire, and there's some warmth in the vessel, if it's detached long enough, it's not going to cook any longer. So he explains that a person who's not the Talmud Chacham himself, it's important to have that connection to the Talmud Chacham, because that's like the Kli Rishon associated with the fire. If you want to have that heat and that vibrancy, you have to be connected to the fire. But if you remove yourself for an extended period of time, or whatever the amount of time is, and you cool down, it's no longer the same, because the person is not the Torah itself. That's the Chofetz Chaim. So what I'm saying is like this: Hagar, when she was Avraham, she lived in Avram's home, and she had a relation with Avram. In her mindset, she was in an environment which was only conducive to Kedusha. She was connected to holiness. The moment she was detached and she was sent off not to come back, being in that state, this is like the moment you detach, you never know where you could go. So when it says Vatesa, it doesn't mean she immediately went back to idolatry. She didn't go back to idolatry. But the moment she understood she was detached, the erosion, that level subliminal erosion started. Meaning she was susceptible to that. She's vulnerable to it. Not that she was that. So she was still that very holy woman at this point. As a result of that, when she believed her son was dying, and then all of a sudden her son prays, is mispalil. Vayishma Hashem is called now Hashem, the Malach speaks to her. She's still not phased because she's still at that special level. So when it says Chosel Gulu Aviyah, it doesn't mean she actually Chosel Gulu Aviyah. It's only because of the mindset that she was detached. She was sent off not to return. Therefore, this is the question. This is the equivalent of Hisham Lechem Pen Yiftov Avchem. That's the way I understood it. So when Yitzchak went and he located her to bring her back to his father as a wife, after Sarah Mena passed away, Hagar was still at Tzadekis. She was still that holy woman. Okay? And so as long as Sarah Mena was alive, she thought she's gone forever. Being gone forever, that means she had that level of attachment. But factually, she never went back to idolatry. Now she is that holy woman. Yitzchak, no, now after his mother passes away, he brings her back to his father that she should be his wife now, because she's still that tzadeka, she's still that holy woman. When Yitzchak brought back Hagar, Keturah, as a wife for Avraham Avinu, that was only after Yitzchak, it was the time Yitzchak was getting married. And the Medrash says that we see from Yitzchak and Avraham that he only married only after he had all his children married off. It's not a good idea to marry. We're talking about we have adult children. We're not talking about we have little children where you need a wife to help you raise the children. You need that wife. That if you have older children, you should not get married to another woman till they're married off. As you see by Yitzchak, Abraham only remarried Hagar only if Yitzchak was going out of the house, was leaving the house. But as long as he was in the house, it's not a good idea. That's the Medrash Tanchuma. Okay.
Rabbi, and how do we understand?
The life of Sarah was 100 years. Ezrim Shana, 20 years, V'sheva Shana. Could have said it's 127 years. 100 years, 20 years, 7 years. And then it concludes, Shnei Chaya Sarah. These were the years of Sarah's life. I mean, evidently, if she lived 127 years, those were the years of her life. So seemingly the concluding words are totally superfluous, correct? So let's see Rashi. By every set of numbers, every unit, it says Shana. When she was 100 years old, she was like a woman who was 20, that until the age of 20, a person does not have certain liabilities for sin. She was as pure at 100 as she was at 20. No lie. Ma baschot lochoto, shere'ena bas onshin, a baschuf lochet, o baschov kbazayin liyofi. When she was 20, she was like a 7-year-old child in beauty. What does that mean? So the way the Mefarshim explain it, that a woman, from the time she's born till the age of 7, she develops in terms of physically. It's only as an adult, you see the beauty that stopped developing at the age of 7. Now it's just maturity. It's maturing. Sari Menu, her development in beauty continued till she was 20 years old. That's what it means. Baschov is kebazayin liyofi. Shnei chayesoro. What's the conclusion? She lived 127 years. Evidently, these were the years of Sarah's life. Kulan shavad l'tova. They're all equal, being good. Now, how do we understand that? If you take a look, when she was taken by Paro, and she was nearly defiled, and if you take a look at the Medrash, she was crying, and she says to Hashem, I came and I went with my husband, and you told him Lech Lecha, and I did this, and now look where I am. My husband's going to be killed, may be killed, and I will be defiled. And Hashem says, you have nothing to worry about. It was pretty traumatic. And with Avimelech, also. So how could they be Shnei Chai Kulan Shovel Tova? Are we talking about that? What that? You tell me Sarah made was such a tzadekes that even bad was good to her. Is that what the Torah is telling us? If that's expected of even an ordinary Jew, we say die in the emes. So what? That was Kulan Shovel Tova. All the years were equally as good. So evidently, it's not conceptually. She believed it. She internalized it. She experienced that every moment of her life was Latova. So Torah has, what exactly does this mean? She had very difficult times in her lifetime. Rosenberger Rebbe, Zechat Tzaddik Lebracha. He lost a wife and 11 children during the war. He was in Auschwitz. He had a kilo. He had a community of thousands of Hasidim. They were all murdered. And he shared after the war. And Mr. Glick, he was 20 years old at the time. And the Klosenberger Rebbe spoke in Williamsburg. And there was a crowd of people. And the Klosenberger Rebbe, when he was in the camps, they shaved his beard, as they shaved everyone. His beard was jet black. And he spoke. Mr. Glick wasn't an ordinary person. He understood what it means to be fierce. He spoke, he said, his eyes were like glowing coals. He spoke with a level of determination. His mouth was like a flamethrower. And he was saying,
How about we have a guest this morning?
I see that. I want him to be, I don't want you to distract him. I want to hear all the words of Torah. Okay?
We're
Good.
trying to get up early. Yeah.
Good, Baruch Hashem. Should have nachas. So he said, he spoke with a level of determination. We're going to rebuild and we're going to reestablish Torah and this and that, whatever it was. The man just went through Gehenna. Literally. A wife, 11 children, a community, thousands of Hasidim. And what he saw and what he experienced. And he even showed he had scars on his body because they beat him in the camps. In the camp, they beat him. And they literally tortured him. So, and he said he never doubted. Everything was Latova. Is that what the Torah is telling us? That's Sori Menu. Kul Neshav Latova. Shnei Chai Sora. That a Jew has to have that level of belief. It was for the best that his wife and his 11 children, that's dynamis. That you don't question is a different story. But to be able to internalize that to see it is for good, it's a whole different level. Now, it's true. When Sari Menu was taken, and she could have been defiled, whatever happened. But at the end of her life, in retrospect, every piece fit in perfectly. Now she sees the full picture. Why every nuance and every event and every experience had to be, and only because of that, she was the founding matriarch of Klal Yisrael. Every experience, whether it's Masova Shimon, whatever it may be. At the end of her life, Kulan Shovel Tova. There wasn't a moment, a nuance of her life, which wasn't that she didn't appreciate it and she understood it was Latova. It had to be that way. It couldn't be differently. That's what the Torah is telling us. Chazal tell us that we spent 210 years in Egypt. No Jewish woman was defiled by an Egyptian except one. The story Shlomo Vasdifri. Why? It was the merit of Sari Menu, as she was not defiled in Egypt. Masa of a similar bonim, no Jewish woman. So the pedigree of Klal Yisrael, Achanochi Hashem attests that every Jewish child was fathered by a Jew, not by an Egyptian. Although it's something which defies the mind. How's it possible? The slaves, the chattels, they killed them, they tortured them. You mean they didn't defile their women? It was a divine shmira due to Sari Menu. And she would not allow Paro, although he was the monarch of the most advanced civilization, to go near her. In that merit, because of that tznius, because of that modesty and that purity, all our granddaughters merited that divine protection. You know what the value of it is? Is a Klal Yisrael. We were only able to receive Torah at Sinai because we were the children of the paternal line of the Avos HaKadosh, of the Shvatim. If God forbid, if it would have been the pedigree, would have been Egyptian, there wouldn't have been a Kabbalah Torah. So it was the merit of Sarimei. You know, that's Kul Shavuot Tova. So every traumatic moment later turned out, and she understood and she appreciated it. It was for the best. That's Shnei Chayasora. There was a story many years ago, and Jay worked for a certain firm, and there was an intern there. His name was Nicholas. I'm not sure if he was there when Jay was there. And he was becoming about tshuva. And this boy, his mother was Jewish, his father wasn't a Jew. And he was becoming observant. I don't know if he was wearing tefillin, this and that. And they're working on the deal. They're raising money to build a foundry in China. And they had to bid on the deal. And this boy worked for months raising money, and then it was put out to bid by the Chinese government. And they lost the bid. And this boy was upset because he felt that the head of the firm should have offered a higher bid because they had the money. And he offered a lower bid. He was upset. What happens? 3 months later, and they already poured the foundation for this foundry, this and that. To pour the foundation for this foundry, it was a very large foundry, cost maybe $10-15 million, maybe more. There was an earthquake in China. As a result of the earthquake, the ground shifted, the foundation was cracked, $15 million out the window. So the head of the firm says to me, see, it was for the best. If we would have put the money there, we would have lost the whole deal. We were protected that we lost the bid. We didn't get the bid. So retrospect, what do you see? You see Gamzu Latova, Kul Mashav Latova. It's for the best. Hashem protected us. Sorry Meinu at the end of her life, so every detail of her life was Latova, was for the best. That's Kul Mashav Latova. Rashi citing the Midrash, Kul Mashav Latova. Rabbeinu Bachli says, famous Rabbeinu Bachli says the same thing by Yaakov Avinu. The numerical value of Vayiyu is what? Is 37. What was the true life of Sarah's years that she really lived? She glowed and she thrived when she had a son. When she gave birth to Yitzchak Avinu, the patriarch, those years were that was her life. Vayu Chayisora. She happened to live 127 years. But what was Shnei Chayisora? The Shnei Chayisora, going back on the Vayu, the 37 years she lived, that was the years of her life. The other years were whatever. She did tremendous things. But comparatively speaking, the ultimate years of her life was Vayu, was the 37. Now, how do we understand it? We say that when they left Choron, it says that Avraham took Hanefesh Asher Osu B'Choron. They took the souls they made in Choron. So Rashi cites Chazal, Avraham Megayer Noshim, Sarah Megayer is Noshim. Avraham converted the males to monotheism, and Sarah converted the women. Tremendous accomplishment. They disseminated monotheism to the world. And you say, you know what her life was? 37 from the time she gave birth to Yitzhak till she passed away. That was the essence of her life. Now, we're going to read in this week's parasha that Hashem berach Avram Bakol. Hashem blessed Avram with everything. What's Bakol? Bakol is B'gematria Ben. Right? Famous Rashi cites Chazal. The numerical value of Bakol is Ben. That was everything. Meaning everything in his life, his wealth, his accomplishments, pale to that. That was that was everything. Once he fathered the patriarch, everything was not even secondary. It was considered almost non-existent in terms of that. That was everything. So just as that was everything, even though Avraham Avinu introduced monotheism into the world, but you realize without a Yitzchak, without somebody to carry on his legacy and his purpose, that ultimately there's me a Klal Yisrael, it's nothing, comparatively speaking. So just as Avram Bakol Mek Yitzchak, identically Vayu, the 37, Shtei Chai Yisora, that was the essence of her life, that she was the matriarch to be able to mother the future patriarch of the Jewish people. That's the understanding. That right after the Akedah, when the Malach says to Avram, withdraw your hand from the lad, don't slaughter him. So immediately he was informed through Ruach HaKodesh that Besuel had fathered Rivka, that Rivka was born. Right? Rashi over there brings it. That it was communicated to him through Ruach HaKodesh that Yitzchak, his mate, the future matriarch, was born into existence. Because it says, if he wouldn't slaughtered, it's not a problem. There's no future. But since now Yitzchak's alive, he needs a wife. So it was communicated to Abram, there's a wife waiting for him. Who's the wife? The daughter of Besuel, Rivka. Right? This is Rashi at the end of the previous parsha. That's what ends in terms of Nochor. He had a wife and he had a concubine. From the wife, he had 8 children, and from the concubine, he had 4, which are 12, which corresponds to Klal Yisrael. Right? If you take a look at the last Rashi, Chav Gimel in Vayiro, Ubsul Yolad es Rivka, Kol HaYichusa Lo L'Dichtav Elo B'Shul Posuk Zeh. All the pedigrees that we're speaking about until this point, the value of all that is only for this concluding Posuk, that Besuel fathered Rivka, because that's relevant to us. She's the future matriarch. So Avram knew immediately that Yitzchak, his mate, his counterpart, is waiting. Now we have those two Eliezer and Avram. He's telling him to go and locate this woman. She has to be from his family, so on and so forth. And Eliezer understands, if his master says, okay, he's bound to the oath. But in Avram's mind, there's no question. You just have to take the initiative. You have to go locate her, but she's waiting. This is what happens if the woman doesn't want to come back. What about what? By Avraham Avinu, there's no what, so what about? In his mind, he knew definitely, because it was communicated in time of the Akedah, right after the Akedah, that Rivka was born to be the future matriarch. There's no question. Eliezer, that's something he didn't share with Eliezer. Eliezer had no idea. Therefore, he says, maybe the woman's not going to come back. Maybe the family is going to hold me up. You don't have to worry. It's going to happen. Yishra Hashem alochu. God will send his angel. It's going to work out. You don't have to worry about it. It's true. The reason why it worked out, they wanted to initially poison Eliezer. There was a malach there. And he took, the food was switched, and Besuel ate the food and died, and Eliezer didn't die. So there was a malach. But Avram had no questions. There's going to be a matriarch. Who's that matriarch? It's be Rivka. How did he know this? Very simple. Because Hashem communicated to him right after the Akedah. Simple understanding. Eliezer is referred to as Damascus Eliezer. Damascus. Do we have to know? So the word Damascus means he came from Damascus. Is it important to us if he came from Aleppo, or he came from Damascus, or he came from Cairo? It's all irrelevant to us where he came from. But Torah makes it a point, Damascus Eliezer. So the Gemara in Yuma tells us, and Rashi cites Chazal, it's time, and realize we're over time. He drew from wealth springs of his master to disseminate Torah. He's a man who radiated holiness, and yet he binds him hand and foot with oaths and everything else to make sure he carries out his agency. Leave this for tomorrow.